And so what I'd like to do is to go through a bit more, just a bit more, and then we are going to turn you loose over some data. Okay? All right. I'd like to introduce you. You've heard me use this term dialogue. I'd like to introduce you to something that is called data dialogue. Because remember, early on, we said that part of an assessment cycle, once you collect the data, so many of us in higher ed take that data and sort of stuck it off into a room, and that's the end of it. And we're no longer in a place where we can do that. So I want to encourage you, the rest of this time we're going to be together here today is about using the data, figuring out what the data tells us, and then deciding what we're going to do about what the data tells us, okay? All right. And we are going to do that through this concept of data dialogue. I want to remind you why we do assessment. Again, assessment, Walvord, Barbara Walvord, another one of those gurus in the assessment world. She says assessment is the systematic collection of information about student learning using the time, knowledge, expertise, and resources available to put it on a shelf. I don't think so, right? In order to inform decisions that in turn affect student learning, okay? All right. We do assessment to answer one question. One question. How do you know that your students have learned? As faculty members, it is critical for us to be able to answer that question. How do we know? And Mary Allen says, purpose of assessment is to uncover findings that inform decision-making about student learning. In no case do we take the data, collect it, and stick it on a shelf and do nothing with it. That just can't be anymore in higher ed. We have to use the data. So here's where we're going today. I want you to know that there's lots of reasons the assessment loop does not get closed. Remember we started early on in our conversation and I identified for you what U of P's assessment loop is, which is very typical, right? You start out with your planning, you collect and analyze your data, you implement some kind of improvement, and then you go ahead and monitor whether or not you have improved. But if there's an unclear definition of what assessment is, then it's likely that that loop won't get closed. If there is no leadership, the loop will not get closed. You have an excellent leader here in Luis. His heart for assessment is phenomenal. I wish to pluck him and put him into my office in Phoenix, okay? Sorry. Yes, I know, I can't do that. Here's the other thing. There is, sometimes assessment loops don't get closed because there's just plain not enough money to do it. Is what it is. One of the, when you're a for-profit institution, money is not necessarily an object. It doesn't get in the way of things, right? And so, Luis asked me earlier, how much money would you say that you guys have put into? And I'm like, wow, I don't know. I can say that the system itself, this electronic system that we're building, we're calling assessment management tool, we've dropped about $7 million into that in the last year and a half. Okay. That doesn't include my whole office. It doesn't include those 9 assessment deans. It doesn't include those 360 campus faculty assessment liaisons who are all engaged in the assessment work. Okay? It takes money to do assessment. But electronics haven't been around all that long. assessment can still be done with an Excel spreadsheet. What it takes is what that man has, which is heart. It's about student success. If the student is at the fore, then as faculty, we're going to do what we need to do. Unfortunately, we're not K-12 teachers where we get like a $250, thing against our taxes. But our students are really important to us, so we're going to do what we have to do. Sometimes if we try to do too much too quickly, it can derail the whole thing. And so one of the things I want to encourage you guys to do is to get that plan in place. Look way out there and say, what are we going to do semester to semester and year to year? And then work towards operationalizing that plan. So at U of P, we had a situation where in the fiscal year 14, which is our academic year, we just call them fiscal years. In fiscal year 14, they did a complete assessment loop. Plan, collect the data, implement improvement, and re-evaluate in 6 months in fiscal year 14. The faculty had an absolute conniption. So I come in, what do I know? It's August, I come in, how's it going, what's going on, and what do I hear? Well, you can't do this. What, 6 months? We don't do an assessment cycle in 6 months. 2 years. And you guys are at 4 years. That's even better, okay? I have 2 years is pretty normal, typical from my experience. So try not to do too much too quickly. Pay attention to assessment doesn't get closed if assessment processes are not sustained over time. It's really important that we just keep at it. Here's the other thing that's going to derail us. If we're doing assessment for compliance only, because our accreditor tells us we have to, we miss the point completely, and we will not follow through. Because the most important thing is the student and the continuous improvement of our practices and processes. That's what's important. Keeping our focus on that will help us. Whether we like it or not, there can be philosophical differences about assessment. There are long-standing arguments. For example, we talked about one earlier, grades. I know my students are learning because they're getting A's. Not sure I agree with that, okay? So philosophy can be an issue, and I want to encourage you as a group and as an institution to make sure you're all on the same page with why you're doing what you're doing. Assessment's hard, especially if it's not being done electronically. If it's an additional something that faculty have to do, if it's not embedded in their course, they have to come together for some purpose, it can get really tiring really quickly. Another reason that we went to a course embedded model. And here's the other thing. It's somebody else's job to do that. It's not my job, right? So let's be really careful about those things, because the flip side is that there are some really good solid reasons why the loop should be closed. One, because there is a return on the investment immediately. When you start that whole process and get that first piece of data out that tells you your students are learning or not, there's a return on what you have done. So return on investment. Student learning improves. Their experience as students improve. Your programs will get stronger if you will engage in regular assessment practice. You will get better retention and graduation rates. All of us are quite concerned about those things. We want to make sure that we do that. Your accreditation reviews will go much better, and Alice will be bowing at your feet. Okay? Here's the other thing. Remember I told you earlier that when we design a program, way back or, before we start building courses, we design a program. And the reason for that is because we get a shared understanding of what the mission is for that particular program. What is its purpose? Everybody gets on that same page. And then, over in Arizona, with our accreditor, we have to be really transparent about our data. It gets put out there publicly. And do you want it shown that your students aren't learning? I certainly don't want it shown that mine aren't learning. I'm going to do everything I can to prove exactly the opposite. Oh yes, and of course more willing donors and more satisfied employers are always a good reason to do assessment practice. Okay, so Data Dialog asks this question: what is the data telling us? And so here are some things, some very practical things that I want to introduce you to, and then look at, we're going to look at some data and we're going to apply some of this stuff, okay? So the first thing is that in order to have a dialogue around data, you have to include the appropriate personnel. The faculty, gotta have the student, gotta have the students. Wouldn't it be interesting to have students sitting at the table with you as you're going through your data? Do you know what kind of perspective the student brings? So, one novel idea, right? Bring the student in. Bring in alumni as well. Let them help you with your data analysis. This is all good. It's important that periodically the learning outcomes, whether at the course level or the program level or the institutional level, actually get looked at. It breaks my heart when I hear a faculty member say to me that they've been teaching this course for 25 years and these are the same assignments I've always done. Oh, I'm sorry. Right? Okay, so here's some questions that when you're looking at learning outcomes, what you can ask. Does the learning outcome describe what you want to see in terms of observable and accessible behavior? This is important. That's learning behavior, but does the learning outcome actually get at what you really want the student to be learning? If you want them to be creating a business plan, you're not going to teach them how to list something, right? You're going to teach them how to create that business plan. Are the learning outcomes clear, concise, and unambiguous? Do they describe complex, higher order knowledge and skills? You want to try, especially in as a community college in your second year, not necessarily in your first, but in your second year, you want to get into the upper levels of blues. It's time to get them prepared, because remember, you got articulation agreements. Those students are going to go on to a four-year institution. And the last thing in the world that you'd want is for that institution to come back down here to community college and tell you that your students are not prepared to get into a four-year program, right? So you want to introduce them to higher order critical thinking skills, especially early on. Another question: to what extent do the student learning outcomes represent a scope and depth of student learning that are appropriate for that course or that program? To what extent will the learning outcomes prepare students for societal service, for employment, or for collegiate opportunities that are articulated by the institution? If you advertise that your students are ready to go on to a four-year institution, they had better be ready to go on to a four-year institution. An assessment allows you to create the proof of that. Okay. If slow revision is needed, you include that in your action plan. Okay? I also want to encourage you to review your syllabi on a regular basis. Because heaven forbid, if you are teaching educational technology and you haven't changed your course in 5 years, oh my gosh, that's a problem, right? Okay. Make sure that your syllabi actually match up to those curriculum maps. Make sure that the courses are actually relevant to the program in which they are supposed to be housed. Okay? Everything has to align. And if you find that revision is needed in course syllabi, make that part of the action plan. Third thing, make sure you have alignment from the course to the program to the institution. Everything has to align. And the more transparent you are at the course level, put the parentheses with the program learning outcome. Even, I'm driving some change down at U of P right now because the course design guide currently lists only the course learning outcomes. I want the program learning outcomes first, then I want the course learning outcomes. Then behind those course learning outcomes, I want to know which one of those program outcomes is actually reflected in this particular course, right? And then I want to see all those activities and all those assignments that are formative in nature. I want to see them aligned to the same learning outcomes that we say that this course is supposed to be reflective of. And then we get down to that signature assignment, and its rubric had better reflect those learning outcomes that we said all the way at the beginning of that syllabus, right? So we make sure we have alignment all the way across the line. And oh, by the way, if we don't find alignment, what do? We include that in our action plan. Okay. You have to review the data. In our case, it's reports, right? So we have to look at that. And we ask these kinds of questions as we're looking at the data. To what extent did students develop the expected knowledge and skills related to the focused student learning outcome? Remember we said that we had a criteria for success. If we said that for this particular learning outcomes, 80% of our students were going to meet and exceed, and we set that ahead of time, then we go about teaching, measuring, looking at the data, and the data says, nah, you only got to 65%, not that 80%. Then you got to go back and figure out, where did we go wrong? Okay. Here's a really important question. What's important to you as the faculty member? And what isn't in the data? And you have to have that, got to grapple with that question as faculty, okay? Does the benchmark or the target or whatever, that 80%, that criteria for success, how does it compare to the actual? So if you're looking at the data and it says you only got, a 65% meet and exceed when you set a target of 80%, then you've got to look and see where's the problem. And are you satisfied as a reviewer with what that is? So let's say that you set the target at 80% and the data comes up and it's 78%. Is it close enough? Are you satisfied with that? And what justifies that satisfaction? What surprises you about the data? Like when that course, I put that course up on the, I put that up on the screen at the Psych 400, and APA, they only had 67%, 2/3 of their students able to write in APA format. You think that faculty, those faculty didn't sit there and have a long conversation about how it's possible that only 2/3 of their students can write in that required format at a 400 level class? Of course they did. Okay. let's talk scoring bias and selection bias. There's lots of factors that go into scoring. And one of the things that assessment data really drives is an opportunity to be really honest. And so I want to encourage you to be really honest when you're looking at that data. One of the things that happened to us at Fresno Pacific, we looked at the data after the first year in this one program for these couple of courses, and it indicated, this is now, Fresno is it's in the top 10 institutions in the country for first generation students and graduating Hispanic students. And like almost 40% of the student body is Hispanic there, Hispanic and first generation. And when the data started to come out and we were looking at ethnicity and gender and matching those things up, the faculty said, why are we scoring our Hispanic males lower than we're scoring our Caucasian males? Hard question. Because it forced them to start to face some really interesting situations. This is a faculty that is 99% Caucasian. So they had to really face some hard things. And that's what data does for us. It's not meant to slap us on the hand. It's meant to drive good, solid conversation. And that's what happens, right? Okay. So be careful. Let's see what. Does the data tell us that we have a weakness in the curriculum? And if so, how do we fix that? That's part of the conversation. How effective are the particular assignments at actually measuring the learning that's going on? And maybe we need to revise the assignments themselves and the rubrics that go along with them. Okay? So dialogue. Dialogue is important around specific questions. And then the last step of the dialogue is to actually create an actionable plan. And that business of a plan being actionable is that we want to set our sights to do something that is not so overwhelming that we know darn right well we're never going to do this. Okay? So we want to take that small step. And that's what the action plan does. It really forces us to have that conversation, shall we say. So, I am done talking. Let's do some data analysis. And so, what we're going to give to each table is some data. And we just want to give each table something different. And so you can leave the blue if you want. Leave the blue. Are these three different? These are three different ones. So leave them to do blue, and we'll leave this one. We'll do, how about if we have you two join this table right here, and that will give them